Before we get into today's topic, I'd like to discuss how I came upon all this new information. After I got my PhD degree at the University of Virginia, I moved on to the University of Wisconsin School of Medicine, where I taught medical students the foundation of how cells and biology work. In my course to medical students, we were talking at the time about the fact that genes control life. However, my research that I was doing at the same time I was teaching involved cloning stem cells. And in these experiments, I learned something that was so exciting and dramatically new that it changed my life entirely. In my research, I learned that cells are not controlled by genes, but cells are controlled by information from the environment that is picked up by the cells and translated into genetic activity. The relevance of all this is that it really challenged the conventional belief that genes control our life. And I'll always remember the first time I went back to the University of Wisconsin after leaving it to offer my new insights to science. I went back and saw all my colleagues, and I wanted to tell them about my new discoveries in the nature of how the cell membrane was actually controlling the cell and not the genes. So I was invited to come in on a Wednesday. We call it our Wednesday noon seminar, where most of the faculty come in and bring their bag lunch, and it's a little bit of a social hangout as much as hearing a presentation. So I show up on my invited Wednesday, and the room is filled. I see all of my former colleagues in that room, as well as a bunch of new students, and I'm excited about giving them this brand new science I've been working on. My talk was called The Membrane as an Information Processor. Well, I got into the talk, and very excitedly, of course, because all this new information was challenging the conventional beliefs. Near the end of my talk, I realized something. As I looked over the audience, not one person had opened their bag lunch. Nobody was talking to each other. They were all staring at me with big moon-shaped eyes, looking as if I'd come from outer space, I felt at that moment. It disturbed me as I closed my seminar and said to the audience, "Thank you very much." What happened next was even more disturbing to me personally, because nobody said a word. I said, "Thank you very much," and there was this dead silence in the room. It seemed like hours for me. It may have only been seconds. And in that dead silence, they looked at me, I looked at them, nobody moved, nobody said anything. Then all of a sudden, one person in the very back of the room started to clap. I remember exactly. He clapped twice. He went once, twice, and then all the other people in the room turned and stared at him, and immediately put his hands down and stopped clapping. And then in the next moment, as if there was an invisible conductor, everybody in the room stood up, and everybody in the room walked out. And there I stood alone in front of the room thinking, oh my God, maybe I'm crazy. They just walked out on me. None of the people I even knew very closely stayed behind to ask me any questions. And this really scared me at that moment, because I thought maybe I am crazy with this new idea. That was changed when I went back to the University of Virginia, where I got my PhD and had an opportunity to talk to some of the distinguished faculty that was on my PhD committee. One of the people I talked with was Lionel Reben. He was one of the world's leading cell biologists at the time. And I remember sitting down in the desk across from Lenny, and I said to Lenny, "Listen, let me explain my new ideas, and I really just want you to tell me where am I wrong? Just so if I know where I'm wrong, I can get off of this whole idea and do something else." So I sat there and I explained my ideas to him, my hypothesis about the membrane. And I waited, and as Lenny mulled over his response, I remember him, he looked at me and he goes, "Bruce, it's just not what we're thinking." And I laughed for a second to myself, and I said, "Yes, but Lenny, I know it's not what you're thinking. I just really want to know what's wrong with it, so if there's anything wrong, I can at least stop kidding myself that I have something new here." He paused again, and this time he looked at me and dead serious, and he said, "You know, Bruce, the unfortunate part is that your theory is just too simple." And all of a sudden, I bellowed out a big laugh in his face. Lenny leans back in his seat and looked at me like I was insane at that moment. And when I contained myself, I stopped and I said, Lenny, let me tell you why I'm laughing." And I said, in my first week of graduate school here, I learned something in a course, and it was called Occam's razor. And Occam's razor is a scientific principle that says the simplest hypothesis is the best hypothesis and most likely one, and should be considered first. So I said to Lenny, I said, all I can say is thank you, because that was the best answer you could have ever given me. Yes, this hypothesis may be simple, but guess what? In the intervening years since then, everything I talked about has now come to the forefront of science. It is actually the foundation of the leading edge of science called epigenetics. And this is the topic that we'll discuss further in the video series. However, I'd now like to talk to you about today's topic, vaccinations and tonsils. At this very time in our culture, we're beginning to find that there's a very big issue concerning the need for vaccines, and that the government is even considering mandatory vaccines for us. And before we go that deep, I would really like to provide some information about the nature of the immune system and the role of vaccines. Very important point. An infant's immune system is not really developed until the first 2 or 3 years of its life. In fact, nature provides immunity for these infants via mother's breast milk. The mother's milk contains antibodies that can protect the child until that child's immune system begins to function. As I said, this function doesn't really mature until after 2 or 3 years of age. Well, the significance about that is when a vaccine is administered to a child younger than that and administered through the skin, this leads to a big problem in the system because the immune system is not fully developed at this point, and providing antigens under the skin is not an appropriate way to engage an immune system for a child. The reason is this, that we've had a big misunderstanding about the nature of something called tonsils. If you look on the web and try to get your information from that source, or you talk to conventional medical doctors, most of them will tell you that the tonsils are a protection device that protects us from bacteria and viruses entering our system by going down our throat into our gut. Well, this is actually a very incorrect assumption and understanding about the nature of tonsils. The concept that tonsils are there to protect us from the invasion of bacteria and viruses is totally misleading for a simple reason. The tonsils are found directly underneath the thickest layer in the digestive tract, a layer of surface cells that are thicker than actually skin on the outside of the body. The point is very simple. This is the least likely place for an invasion of bacteria, viruses, and parasites to enter into our system. Others suggest that the tonsils clear such pathogens before they actually enter into the digestive tract. Well, this is a problem considering the fact that the tonsils are not even at the surface of the digestive tract, and therefore do not really have a direct contact with incoming pathogens. My research and understanding the nature of tonsils led to a different vision, and the vision is this. Tonsils are connected via channels to the throat, and the significance is that as things are swallowed, as we swallow food or swallow anything down our throat, most of the material goes straight down the throat. But these little channels that open up to the tonsils allow a small fraction, perhaps a 1,000th of whatever is passing over the throat at that moment, to go down the channel. So in other words, tonsils are open to the outside, not to block pathogens from coming in, but actually to open and welcome these pathogens for a very important reason. The tonsils are learning centers, and this is why nature built the tonsils to bring in pathogens from the environment so the immune system can learn about the environment in which we live. The fact that this is nature's natural immunity system is really expressed in the behavior of young infants. And what you will know if you watch them is that infants will have a tendency to stick everything into their mouth. Anything they can find that they can put into their mouth, including their own feet, will end up in there. This is not an accident or just strange behavior. This is actually nature's way of creating natural immunization. The significance is, as a child puts everything from the environment into its mouth, and that stuff goes down into the throat, a small sample of it is picked up and travels down the channels into the tonsils. In the tonsils, this is where the immune cells read the environmental information, be it viruses or bacteria, and then learn how to create an antibody response to these pathogens. So the significance is that tonsils are nature's natural immune system. I'm not against vaccinations per se, but I am against vaccinations that bypass the natural immune system. In other words, a vaccination that is injected underneath the skin does not really conform to nature's system of forming an immune response. Nature designed a system to have the pathogens come in orally, and this unfortunately leads to a problem because when we inject the vaccines under the skin, this clearly bypasses the natural immune route and actually confuses the system, because the biology has a lot of intelligence to it and analyzes everything that comes into the system. So putting a needle into an infant and then depositing a large bolus of foreign material is actually confusing of the system and can influence the immune system in a very negative way. So our understanding is this: tonsils are not there for protection, they're there for learning. And this is really important when you hear how many people have had their tonsils removed as being an extraneous, unnecessary element in our biology, when in fact they are fundamentally primal in creating a natural immune system. It's very important to also recognize this: there's a fundamental belief that the immune system kills everything that comes into the body that's not your human cells, so that the concept is that everything that's other than human is foreign and should be rejected. Well, this turns out not to be true for a very important reason, that in addition to the 50 trillion cells that we have as human cells, there are actually 500 trillion bacteria that live on and in your body. These bacteria are part of your actual life mechanism. In other words, if we remove all the bacteria from the system, you will die, because the bacteria are fundamentally helping us with our digestive process, and the bacteria are also one of the best part of our immune system. These bacteria, which are specific to you, represent what is called the microbiome. The microbiome is a large population of skin bacteria and internal bacteria that are helping you survive. The significance is, while they're foreign cells, they are actually part of your own body and necessary for your life. This is why science has recently changed the category of a human into not just an organism, but a superorganism. Because what we have to do is include those bacteria that are in our gut and on our skin as relevant to our life and necessary for our survival. Interestingly, the immune system recognizes those bacteria and microbiome and does not attack them at all. Why? The immune system really recognizes any pathogen that disturbs or undoes the normal functions of the biology that we have. So a microbiome is not disturbing it, but is actually necessary for its continued survival. And we should take into consideration the necessity of that microbiome for our survival when we take antibiotics. There is just so many antibiotics taken by the people in this particular country. They don't understand that when you take antibiotics, not only do you kill the bad pathogens that may be in your system, but you actually kill all the necessary microbes that are supporting your life. So it's very important for us to understand that too many antibiotics is actually destructive of our life and our health. And if you happen to be involved with taking a regimen of antibiotics, let me give you a very important suggestion, and that is this. After your regimen of antibiotics, please reseed your microbiome by using friendly bacteria, probiotics they're referred to, because then you can rebuild the population that was killed by the antibiotic drugs. Because again, without that population, your health will be severely affected in a negative way. So recognize that the immune system only actually eliminates things that traumatize our body, allows foreign things in the body that encourage us, that in that foreign acceptance includes this very massive population of 500 trillion bacteria that are actually helping us survive. And that if we challenge this population using antibiotics to regain health and restore your vitality, it will be necessary to follow that regimen of antibiotics again with probiotics to refeed and reseed those very important cells making up your microbiome.